Greetings, booktubers, and welcome back to Grammaticus Books. And today we're going to be talking about Glory Road by Robert A. Heinlein, copyright 1963, his one and only fantasy novel that he wrote during his career. And we're going to try to answer the question here today. Glory Road, is it glorious or is it inglorious? And hopefully by the end of this video, we'll be able to answer that question. Now, I say hopefully because this is a very complicated book. It is a multifaceted, sort of contradicting in parts book that is going to be a very challenging book to review. But I think it's going to be make for a very interesting video, a very interesting review. But at the same time, it is going to be a challenging book to come to a conclusion on. So stay tuned, buckle up your seatbelts, and let's get started. And we'll start with the book itself here. I'll pick it back up. This is a 1970 Berkeley Medallion edition, science fiction Berkeley Medallion edition, 7th printing, with an unattributed painting on the cover there, sci-fi painting. And it's a sci-fi painting, or at least I'm going to call it a sci-fi painting, even though this is a fantasy novel. And frankly, the painting on this book isn't the best. And I don't even think I can correspond anything in that painting directly to any of the text that happens in the novel. So it's a bit of an unfortunate cover art that got put on there. It is 288 pages. It does have a very interesting dedication by Heinlein to start the book off. And I'm going to go ahead and read to you guys the dedication. It says, "For George H. Sithers and the regular patrons of the terminus Owlswick and Fort Mudge Electric Street Railway." And that was a very interesting dedication. I had to do a little research on it. And George H. Sithers is an editor of science fiction, and he also edited other things as well. And I'm sure that's how he knew Robert A. Heinlein. And these three locations that are mentioned in there are three locations, Terminus, Fort Mudge, and Owlswick, that were located within North America and over in England. And it seems that Robert A. Heinlein and Sithers and some other science fiction authors were basically playing a game of geotag to see who could get to all three of these locations. There is a blurb on the back of the book I'll go ahead and read as well. "The Glory Road led beyond the stars to a far, strange dimension, a world of peril, adventure, and enchantment for a war-weary young American. The elements of epic and the great tradition are here, but changed by the talent and magic of Robert Heinlein to create a story as original and striking as his classic Stranger in a Strange Land." And then it has a triumph by the Chicago Tribune up there, and that's pretty high praise. And you get a little photograph there of Robert Heinlein as well. So that's the physical book itself. Like I said, 1963, which puts it between Starship Troopers in 1959 and Moon is a Harsh Mistress in 1966. But what about the story itself? What is an overview, the basic plot of the story? And just to let you guys know, there will be some spoilers here going forward, so you've been warned. But the story is the main character, Oscar Gordon, is a retired Vietnam veteran. I said he's on leave from the Army. He's taken leave from the Vietnam conflict. It's the early 1960s. It's pre-Gulf of Tonkin, which, if memory serves me correctly, it was August of 1964. So it's before the conflict has been redesignated from a policing action into a full-blown war. But he's still a combat veteran, a Special Forces U.S. combat veteran. And he's out of the Army, and he's now touring across Europe as sort of an American hobo in Europe in the early 1960s. And he's in France when he comes across the most beautiful woman he's ever met in his life. She has all of the characteristics that just entrance him and enthrall him, and she is just stunningly beautiful, and he's completely captivated by her. And of course, he loses track of her. So shortly after that, he's sitting on a bench in Nice, France, and he's going through a newspaper when he comes across a personal ad in the newspaper that seems like it's pointed directly at him and it's written specifically to him. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to read you guys that personal ad because it kicks off the whole story and the adventure. So here's the personal ad. The very first sentence is all in caps, and it says, "Are you a coward? This is not for you. We badly need a brave man. He must be 23 to 25 years old, in perfect health, at least 6 feet tall, weigh about 190 pounds, fluent English with some French, proficient with all weapons, some knowledge of engineering and mathematics essential, willing to travel, no family or emotional ties, indomitably courageous, and handsome of face and figure. Permanent employment, very high pay, glorious adventure, great danger. You must apply in person, 17 Rue Dante, Nice, 2MA Etage, Apartment D. And please forgive me if I butchered that French address at the end of it. So he reads his description, which fits him to a T, other than the part about handsome of face and figure, because he has this horrible scar across his face from the war. And he decides he's going to apply at this address. He gets the address, and it's a clinic. He goes inside, and the first being he meets is this small dwarf-like creature named Rufo. And then, of course, the other person in the clinic is the beautiful woman that he met on the beach, and her name is Star. And they immediately propose him, Rufo and Star, to ask him to join them in an adventure across multiple universes in order to save those universes, that they need a hero to go with them on these adventures. And Oscar Gordon immediately replies yes with almost no hesitation at all. In fact, I'm going to say no hesitation. And it all happens very fast. And at that point, Star puts them down into a pentagram of power on the floor and then uses a spell to transport them directly into the adventure, into another universe, to put their feet upon the path of adventure. And it is very, very reminiscent of A Princess of Mars and how the book starts here. And in fact, Heinlein references Edgar Rice Burroughs numerous times throughout the novel. But it happens very fast, almost too fast. I'm not almost, I'm going to say very, very fast, to the point where it's a little incredulous how quickly it occurs. But that starts the adventure off. So then they travel via the spell to another universe, and they start on a series of these fantasy adventures, these episodic fantasy encounters, as they're working their way towards a dark tower. And in this dark tower, they have to recover a magical MacGuffin that is the key to saving the universe. And in order to get to the tower, they have to resolve these different fantasy encounters leading up to it. And that is essentially the book in a nutshell. And it is very reminiscent. It is very Stephen King-esque from the Dark Tower series. The main character, Oscar Gordon, does remind me a little bit of Roland from the Dark Tower. And obviously you have a Dark Tower and a series of adventures to get to it. And it's also reminiscent of Stephen King's recent novel, Fairy Tale, in that you have all these episodic fairy tale encounters. But obviously this came far before Stephen King's books. But I do have to wonder if somehow, either consciously or subconsciously, that Glory Road did influence Stephen King's Dark Tower series and his recent book, Fairy Tale. But that's the book. So what did I think of the book? So here's my thoughts on the book. The book, if you go into Amazon, if you go into Goodreads, the tag on it says sword and sorcery adventure and escapism, pure escapism. It is absolutely sword and sorcery adventure, but it is not escapism at all. Whoever wrote that tag for Amazon, and which got imported over into Goodreads, they either didn't read this book or they read it and completely didn't understand it, because the fantasy aspect of this book is basically just window dressing by Heinlein in order to set up an environment where he can then expound upon and do discourse on philosophy, sociology, and politics, which is what he loves to talk about and what he likes to inject into all of his books. Additionally, this book is here back in 1963. This is a book about feminine empowerment. 100% this is a book about feminine empowerment because of the three main characters, Oscar Gordon, Rufo, and Star, also known as her wisdom. Star is by far the most powerful of these three characters. She's the most powerful. She has the most agency. She directs every action in the book from the very start of the novel to the very end of the novel. But then there's this weird dichotomy going on with her and Oscar, where she is absolutely subservient to Oscar through the course of the book, continually referring to him as my hero, my liege, and my lord. And this sort of bizarre throwback to a 1950s American sort of marital aspect. But at the same time, she is the one controlling everything. She is the one manipulating everybody, including Oscar, and making everything happen in the order that she wants to happen. She wants it to happen in controlling the flow and pace of the action in the novel from the start to the very finish. So it is very much a female empowerment novel. Now, the novel itself, it starts off with these series of these fantasy encounters, and I'll be frank, the fantasy encounters, they're rather shallow, they're rather superficial, they're silly in parts, and then from there, it leads into Robert A. Heinlein in the latter part of the book, basically discoursing and talking about general life philosophy, about sexual dynamics between the genders. And yes, it goes there into these sexual dynamics, and they're not normal sexual dynamics because this is Robert A. Heinlein we're talking about. And you know he's going to inject it into the novel here at some point, and he does in this book. Um, Thankfully, he doesn't dwell on it, he doesn't get fixated on it, and it never gets down into the gory details of it, which I appreciate. But it does go over some sexual dynamics. And then he also covers wealth, the acquisition of wealth, and whether it can make you happy. And then he goes into democracies and the United States of America. And he makes some very, very interesting and some of the more engaging comments about the United States and democracies. At one point in the book, the main hero, Oscar Gordon, tells one of these characters in one of these multiverses, he goes, "I'm an American." He describes himself. And the character turns back to him and he goes, "American, is that a country or is that a disease?" And I thought that was very telling about Robert E. Heinlein's mindset on democracy. And he follows it up later. There's a conversation, I'm pretty sure it's between Oscar Gordon and Rufo, later in the book where they're talking about the democracy in the United States of America. And they say that, the democracy is a bad form of government, but with the United States, it actually works. And the reason that democracy works with the United States is because the democratic government of the United States allows its people, allows its heroes, the room to breathe so that they can be heroes. And I think that's sort of a key philosophy that comes out during this book with Heinlein here, and it is a very libertarian philosophy. It is very reminiscent of the philosophy that gets worked into The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. And I think in many ways that this book here in 1963, Glory Road by Heinlein, is sort of a test bed for ideas that then subsequently wind up in the Hugo Award winning book, 1966, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. And this book here was nominated for a Hugo in 1964, but it did not win the Hugo. So that's its philosophy that it expounds upon here on democracy, which I thought was very interesting. What is my conclusion for the book? Would I recommend this book? Is it a good book? How did I like it? When you take a look at this book, Glory Road, and you start taking the individual elements and looking at them isolated by themselves, the prose, the dialogue, the characters, the fantasy elements, the plot, looked at individually, they are quite frankly not very good. They just aren't. The dialogue is just essentially a bunch of quips and pithy remarks between the characters from start to finish. There's no realistic dialogue that occurs during the book. It's just all these little quips and pithy remarks going back and forth. The characters themselves are rather flat and one-dimensional. The fantasy element to it is kind of superficial and silly. The plot is basically one-dimensional and just a vehicle for Robert E. Heinlein to expound upon his political and social philosophies. And yet, when you take them together, the sum of the parts is greater than the whole, and in some bizarre manner, it actually works. And all those flaws kind of drop away. They combine together to enrich and empower themselves, to make themselves greater, to multiply their numbers, and to make a greater sum than their individual parts. And the book works, in my opinion, and I actually did enjoy it. It comes together in a nice, satisfactory manner that I personally enjoyed. Now, there is sort of if I had to sum this book up, I would sum it up by a Latin motto that Heinlein writes and repeats throughout the book. And that motto is Dum vivimus vivamus, which translated means, while we live, let us live. And I think that is really what Heinlein is trying to get across in this novel. While you're alive, be alive. Put your feet on the path of adventure. Walk the glory road while you're alive. Whether that means, being an adventurer in the military, going out and participating in all these adventures of life, but in some respect, at some level that you can manage, you should come out and you should practice the philosophy of Dum vivimus vivamus, whilst you live, live. And there's another saying in here in this book that gets repeated numerous times by the main character, Oscar Gordon, that I think sums up what Heinlein is trying to get across to the reader in the book. And that is that a retired hero is useless. There's nothing more useless than a retired hero. That's a phrase that gets repeated, particularly towards the end of the novel, by Oscar Gordon. And he comes to the conclusion, because he's fallen into this status where he's this retired hero, in order to set his life right, he needs to put his feet back upon the path of adventure. And once again, he needs to pick up and walk the glory road. And it works. It oddly and bizarrely works. So can I recommend this book wholeheartedly to everybody out there who likes science fiction? And the answer to that question is complicated. What I would say is, if you've read The Moon is a Harsh Mistress and you like The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, then you are almost certainly going to like this book here by Robert A. Heinlein, Glory Road, because it is quintessential Robert A. Heinlein. If you have read The Moon is a Harsh Mistress and this is not your cup of tea, and I can understand why and how this might not be your cup of tea, then you probably are not going to like this book. I personally liked it. I personally enjoyed it. If you like Robert A. Heinlein, if you like The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, then I would recommend it. But otherwise, you might want to just dip your toe in the water, read a chapter or two before you commit to decide whether you want to read this book or not. And with that, I'm going to say dum vivamus vivamus, and take care, be safe, and I will catch you guys next time.